When you look into some legal dictionaries, if you go and check the definition of the word body corporate, it will tell you to go see the word corporation, and it won't give you a definition. Now, when you look in the older legal dictionaries concerning the word body corporate, you'll find the following definition being brought forth. It says this term, or its equivalent, body corporate, is applied to private corporations. And we know in law, corporation means an artificial person or a legal entity that's created by or under the authority of the laws of a state or of a nation. And we can look at another description of what a corporation is: an entity having authority under law to act as a single person distinct from the shareholders who own it, or a group or succession of persons established in accordance with legal rules into a legal or juristic person that has legal personality distinct from the natural persons who make it up. So we are seeing that a body corporate or a corporate body is an artificial person. It's a legal entity, better known as a corporation. And a body corporate, this legal entity, is known in law as a single person, and it's distinct from the natural persons who make it up. We're looking into a government enactment. This enactment is called the Charter of Vancouver. It's a regulation, a statute that was created by the government, laws that were created by the government. Now it says the City of Vancouver is considered a corporation and has boundaries. And it goes on to say in Article 6 of this enactment that the inhabitants of the area, the boundaries of which are described in this section, shall continue to be a corporation and a municipality with the name of the City of Vancouver. So the City of Vancouver, the inhabitants of the area, they continue to be a corporation. They continue to be a corporate body. And that this corporate body has the name City of Vancouver. Now when we look a little bit deeper into the Ontario Municipal Act, we find the following. It says municipality means a geographic area whose inhabitants are incorporated. You see that? And again, municipality in this act is a reference to a municipality, is a reference to its geographical area or to the municipal corporation as the context requires. And in section 4 of this enactment, it says the inhabitants of every municipality in Ontario are incorporated as a body corporate. So if you're living in Ontario or if you're living in Vancouver, you are seeing that you, as inhabitants of the area, have been incorporated into a body corporate, into a corporation. And that corporation has your city's name or your municipality's name. Here it says the City of Toronto Act or enactment. It says the city is continued. Article 125, subsection 1. The City of Toronto is hereby continued as a body corporate that is composed of the inhabitants of its geographic area. And the municipality means a geographic area whose inhabitants are incorporated. Same operation of law that we saw in Vancouver, transpiring here in Ontario. Ontario, the City of Toronto enactment, is a body corporate, a corporation, and it is composed of its inhabitants. They are incorporated into the corporation called City of Toronto. And we're seeing in Ontario, all the municipalities, the inhabitants of these municipalities are incorporated into their municipality. We look a bit further into the New Brunswick enactment. It's a municipal enactment. We see it says the minister shall administer this act and may designate persons to act on his behalf. the inhabitants of the cities and towns in existence on January 1st, 1967, continue to be bodies corporate. Section 3, subsection 3. The inhabitants of a municipality created under this act are a body corporate under the name prescribed for it under this act. The New Brunswick Municipal Act brings forth the fact or the operation of law that inhabitants of cities and towns, they continue to be or they are a corporate body, a body corporate. And the inhabitants of municipalities are considered a body corporate. So they are incorporated into this company, into this corporation. When you look to the Nova Scotia Municipal Act, you find the same operation of law coming out. It says every municipality incorporated at the date this act comes into force is subject to this act. And then it says in Article 5, subsection 1, the inhabitants of the county of Cape Breton are and continue to be a body corporate under the name Cape Breton Regional Municipality. So what they're doing is, if you are where you are residing, where you are living, where you are inhabiting, they consider you an inhabitant. And they are incorporating you into their corporate body. And the corporate body that you belong to or that you have been incorporated to has the name of your local municipality or local city. So if you live in Toronto, you've been incorporated into the corporate body that is called Toronto. So just like you would think, for example, of McDonald's as being a corporation, and you identify McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken with its name, well, the same thing is happening here in law. Us as inhabitants are being incorporated into these corporations, and the names of these corporations are actually the names of the cities and the towns and the municipalities that we are living in. Again, in subsection 3, the inhabitants of the County of Queens are and continue to be a body corporate under the name Region of Queens Municipality. So when you would say Region of Queens Municipality, you are actually defining in law and describing in law a body corporate, which is or corporate entity. And the inhabitants of this corporate entity have been incorporated into this body and have now become a part of this body. We're looking into the Charter of Winnipeg enactment. And we're looking at the section where it says the city is continued. It says the city of Winnipeg, as constituted immediately before the coming into force of this act, is continued as a body corporate. So Winnipeg is considered a corporation. And the name of this body corporate is City of Winnipeg. And you could actually find that on the stock market if you go looking. Now, within this enactment, it states that an employee means an individual employed by the city and includes a statutory officer. So if you're looking to say that you are an employee of the city, well, it means only a statutory officer. And when we look in Article 96 at what a statutory officer is, we find the following. It says council must appoint the following statutory officers: the chief administrative officer for the city clerk, the chief financial officer, and the city auditor. So we are seeing that employee means only a statutory officer, and we are not statutory officers. When we looked in the other provinces, we found it clearly stated that the municipality or the city, the inhabitants were incorporated. However, in the Winnipeg Charter, we're not finding that. It's only saying that Winnipeg is a corporation, it's continued as a body corporate, and we didn't find where it said the inhabitants are incorporated. But we found so far that an employee means a statutory officer. Okay, that doesn't apply to us. Well, what else do we find in this charter, in this enactment? It says designated employee. When used in a provision of this act, means an employee designated by council to carry out a responsibility under that provision, or a responsibility in respect of a bylaw to which reference is made in that provision. And a bylaw means a bylaw of the city. So a designated employee, if you take the class of designated employee, it means that you have a responsibility in respect of a provision of a bylaw. It means that you have the obligation to follow the bylaws that the city creates. Anyone who has a responsibility or obligation to the bylaws are then deemed or classified as a designated employee. The term designated employee is a class of persons created by this enactment. The bylaw produces the obligation and responsibility. It says, do not park your car, and you do not, and you do it. What will happen? They will tow it away. They claim you had the responsibility to the bylaw and you did not follow it. If you desire to increase your living space, they claim you have the responsibilities to their bylaws and you must perform certain actions according to their bylaws. This is how they're designating you incorporated into their corporation. Even though they don't directly state it, they designate you a designated employee. And they say a designated employee is someone who has obligations to the bylaws that we create. Now, determination of person responsible, where this act or a bylaw provides that anything must be done by a person responsible for something, or where this act or a bylaw provides that a fee, rate, deposit, or other charge is to be paid by a person responsible, then if you fail to do that, a remedial action, including prosecution, may be taken against the person responsible for something. So they create bylaws and they try to apply them against us. They claim that we have an obligation to obey the bylaws they create. And if we do not, they try to take action against us. They say that we're a person responsible for something. They say that we are a designated employee, and as such, we must obey the bylaws they create. And if we fail to obey the bylaws they create, then they can take prosecutions against us or issue fines against us. And that's exactly what they do. In the other enactments that we looked through, it didn't state it this clearly. It didn't show us how clear the operation of law is. It just said to us that these cities, these municipalities, these towns, and subsequent to that, these provinces, they are designated corporations, body corporate in law, and the inhabitants are incorporated. But it didn't go on to say that we're being considered employees. But if we as inhabitants are being incorporated into an incorporation, well, what else can that mean? It doesn't mean that we are fairies or dixies. It means that we are employees of the corporation. And now when you look into the Winnipeg Charter, we find it being described as that. We find the reverse. Instead of it saying, here in Winnipeg, we're a corporation and the inhabitants are incorporated, they don't. They declare we're a corporation and then they define who is considered an employee of this corporation. And through further study, we see that the ones who have obligations to the bylaws, the ones who have responsibilities to the bylaws to obey them, are considered designated employees, which again is a class of person in law. And they go on to say, they create these bylaws, and if we do not obey them, if they try to take action against us, which will include remedial action, including prosecution. They claim we have an obligation and are responsible to do something in the act that we fail to do, whether it is pay a fee or other charge. These duties, they come out of their bylaws. We have been designated that designated employee. And as such, what are we? So in law, all these municipalities, these towns, provinces, and Canada itself is considered a corporation. And we have been incorporated into the local municipalities, into our local cities. So then we are what? We are resident in these corporations. Because when we looked at the definition in law, what resident means, we find the following. Resident is a person who has residence in a particular place. And a residence is the place where a corporation or other enterprise does business. So do you see how this is playing out? when we come to the Income Tax Act, and it says an income tax shall be paid as required by this act on the taxable income for each taxation year of every person resident in Canada. And then we go back and we discern through the laws. We see what's transpiring. We're being incorporated into the corporation. We are considered to be a resident or have our resident in the corporation. Now, the definition of municipality in the criminal code comes out as following. It includes the corporation of a city, town, village, county, township, parish, or other territory or local division of a province, the inhabitants of which are incorporated. So you see the same operation of law in the Criminal Code of Canada. We look through the Municipal Acts. These enactments are the enactments that give the government the powers to create these corporations, to create these towns and villages. And within them, we're seeing and we're finding that we are being incorporated. We are considered to be employees of this corporation where it's doing business. We are being classified as a certain class of persons, forced into legal recognition, forced into incorporation with the local towns and cities. When we look into international law, Article 16, it says that everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. And in the Constitution Act of Canada, Article 7, it says everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. You see, you and I, we have a right, as men and women, to take recognition everywhere as a person before the law. If you want to be considered a designated employee, you have the right to do that. Within the income tax enactment, if you want to be considered the class of person which is designated the officer, you have the right to do that. A right that does not produce an obligation but a choice. However, the legislators and the government has created all these laws that I've shared with you tonight. And these laws, these enactments, they strip you. They remove your fundamental right and freedom. Because you have the right not to be forced into recognition under these enactments. However, they're creating these enactments and they're forcing you into recognition. And they're using this mechanism, this operation of law to control you and to force you into servitude and to submission to them. There are absolute rights, inalienable rights, rights that are not created by the government. And one of them is that we have the right to recognition as a person before the law, not an obligation to play this role. However, the government has gone ahead and created enactments that has forced us to take the role of artificial person, to incorporate us into their local corporations, and thereby govern us by their rules and regulations in the law. So when they come after us, we don't understand how to defend because we don't know what's going on. And this is against our natural rights. I cannot stress it enough. The legislators and the executive powers here in Canada, the ones who you vote for, that you put into the positions of power, they don't have the right to be doing this to you as one individual man or woman. You have inalienable rights. You have natural rights that were God-given to you. And they're respected by law. They're guaranteed by law now because men and women came together and said we're going to honor these rights. And one of them is that the government does not have the power to force you into recognition as a class of person, to force you to take that recognition. And they do it because they want to govern. And they do it because it's their mechanism of control. But if you understand what was transpiring, and if you understood the obligation that they had towards you, you could rise up and go before them and say, hey, what's going on? They create these operations of law. They put these words on these papers and they do magic to our lives. Take away our inalienable rights. Take away our natural designation, God-given rights. Place us into a classification of persons, and then operate their laws upon us and yoke our lives up and don't even tell us what's going on. We don't have to be part of this corporate body. We don't have to be part of this corporation. If you're living in Vancouver, you're residing there as an inhabitant, you've been incorporated into the corporation. You need to tell your local municipality, you need to tell your local government, hey, what are you doing? I don't want to be part of the corporation. I'm here to live free. I'm here to enjoy happiness and pursue life, not to be bound up into your corporation, to owe you obligations to your enactments, to owe duties to your enactments, because you declared that I'm incorporated into your corporation. I have a choice. I have a natural right that is recognized, that is given to me. I choose when I want to take recognition as a person before the law, and I don't want to play this class of person anymore. I don't want to be qualified or classified or designated or recognized as a class of person anymore. Whether you're classifying me as a driver, whether you're classifying me as an employee to your corporation, whether you're classifying me as an officer to Canada, you're only putting me in these categories so you can place your laws upon me and operate upon me through these laws. And if I realized that I didn't have to go into these categories and go into these recognition and go into this designation, you wouldn't have power over my life. You wouldn't have control over my life. And that's why you're worried that I will wake up and that I will see that I have natural rights that are respected internationally, that are respected here domestically through the Constitution Act. And these rights that I have are more powerful than what you're doing to me. Before the Constitution Act of 1982, public law ruled, and you could do what you wanted to me. You could strip me of my fundamental rights and freedoms. But now, since international law came out, and since the new Constitution Act of Canada came in 1982, public law is under the individual. And these laws here, like the Ontario Municipal Act and the City of Toronto Act and the New Brunswick Act, that are forcing people into a corporate body, into recognition as an artificial person before the law, as an employee to these corporate bodies, is against their natural rights. And when the people wake up and when the people understand, they can go before you guys and say, you have an obligation to me, you have a responsibility to me to let me decide if I'm going to play this role. This is the laws that they are using against us. This is the mechanisms that they are using against us. And they are only able to do it by our ignorance. They are only able to do it to us because we don't understand. It's not because they have more power. It's not because they are more stronger than us. It's because they paid individuals to know this law to use it against us. When they come after you under the income tax enactment, they are declaring that you are a resident in Canada. They are declaring that you are part of the Corporation of Canada, a part of this enterprise that does business. In the income tax enactment, you are the officer of Canada, and you are that class of person, and that's how they are making you pay, and that's how they are stealing from you. When you are here in these municipal enactments, they are considering you the employee of the municipality. That is the class of person that they are designating you. When you go to school and you are getting an education, they are designating you the class of person of a student. When you go to the hospital, they are designating you the class of person of a patient. And they're doing this to remove your natural rights and fundamental freedoms. When you're before them and you're a class of person and not standing in your natural recognition, then you owe duties and obligations to the enactments, and they will try to hold you to these enactments. However, there is a whole other side of law that is in operation here in Canada that you can stand under, that is there to allow you to come out of all this bondage and all this garbage that they're doing to our lives.